Hello, everyone. I'm Leslie Kaufman. I'm a senior climate change reporter with Bloomberg Green. Today, we're assembled to talk about a very important issue for the environment, which is aviation and its carbon imprint. Everyone loves to fly, or at least they need to fly to get to work or business. And yet, aviation has a very large carbon footprint, and it's been one of the most stubborn carbon footprints around. As electricity, the carbon footprint around electricity and buildings comes down, aviation remains stubbornly high. During the pandemic, a lot of people flew a lot less, but now with the pandemic ending, we're expecting aviation once again to be a huge carbon factor. Today, we've got a panel who's thought deeply about this issue and is going to talk to us about some of the options for moving forward. I'm going to introduce them now and then ask them a few questions. With us today is Kelley Kizzier. She's the Vice President of Global Climate for the Environmental Defense Fund. Also with us is Brian DiMarino. He's Head of Operational Sustainability at JPMorgan Chase. And finally, Jimmy Samartzis. He's with LanzaJet, an engineering company that produces renewable fuels for jet and diesel. Thank you so much, first of all, for all of you for being here on this very important subject. Kelley, I thought we'd start with you. Can you talk a little bit about this issue? I know that EDF decided that tackling aviation fuel was a priority and brought together a group. Can you talk a little bit about the group you brought together, what it's called, and why it needed to be brought together?
Sure, and thanks for having me today. We need to make massive strides in the low carbon transition of aviation because planes can't rely over long distances on electricity for power. So we need zero emissions alternative fuels available at scale and at the right price. And this is why EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund, have been working on the intersection of climate and aviation for decades. To address the problem, we need all the tools in the box. So we need well-designed subsidies and criteria to ensure that sustainable aviation fuels are of the highest quality. And we need to make sure that leading companies are putting forward demand. So this year we launched the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, we call it SABA, with our partners, the Rocky Mountain Institute and Engie Impact, and several major companies, including JPMorgan Chase, who I'm delighted to say we have with us today. So in SABA, we're working with our company partners, and we'll be working with airlines and fuel producers to drive investment in high quality sustainable aviation fuels, and to provide our partners with an environmentally sound way to address their own aviation emissions. In this way, SABA can be an integral part of putting air travel on a trajectory to net zero climate impact by 2050.
So, Brian, just for a second, you're not an airline company. I'm wondering what you're doing as part of this partnership.
Yeah, we're not. So it's sort of interesting how we got involved, I suppose, and it sort of is taken Kelley's track and then it intersects with ours in that, we've publicly committed to operational carbon neutrality, and we achieved it in 2020. But as we move forward, we're looking for solutions that align with our operational footprint, right? So if you look at our footprint, it's about 3/4 real estate related, about 1/4 related to business travel, and most of that is aviation. On the real estate side, we have a ton of solutions. We have solar panels, we have wind farms, and we're tackling that piece with all of those tools. But on the travel side, we really didn't have anything. And then along came SABA, and EDF called us and said, hey, we have this consortium we're pulling together with JPMorgan, want to be involved. And just very quickly got excited about it, honestly. I mean, the word excitement is not something maybe we typically use around these types of things to start, because they're sort of fledgling and you've got a lot of work to do to get them where they need to be. But it was exciting because people wanted to come together and tackle something that is real and global and interesting. And so we jumped right in, got a lot of senior support for it across the bank, and are excited to be a founding member along with the other founding member companies, Deloitte, BCG, Netflix, Salesforce, Microsoft, Boeing, Bank of America. Kelley, if I missed anyone, let me know. But yeah, it's exciting for us to be able to sort of tackle that other big chunk of our greenhouse gas footprint with a real solution that's aligned to the emissions.
Well, Jimmy, maybe you could talk a little bit about where we stand right now in terms of renewable fuels and aviation, because from where I sit, it looks like there have been real progress in other industries, but not really in aviation. So I thought you could maybe bring us up to date on where we are and why there hasn't been more progress.
Thanks, Leslie. And first of all, thanks for having me on today. Um, I would characterize it as the airline industry and the renewable fuel sector has actually made really good progress. If you think about what we're trying to do, it's not an easy feat. We're trying to replicate what the quality characteristics of fossil-based jet fuel in fuels that are made from renewable sources and from waste-based sources. So this has been partially a technology challenge. And for the last 10 years, there have been companies, including ours, that have been working very diligently to develop technology that produces safe, renewable jet fuel, sustainable aviation fuel, as we call it in the industry, that also can be a drop-in fuel, meaning we want airlines and airports to not have to make any changes whatsoever to their infrastructures and to the aircraft themselves. So we're at a point now where I think globally last year, we probably consumed right around 30 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. In the US alone, we consumed about 5 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. That is a drop in the bucket. At the end of the day, on a global basis, commercial aviation consumes more than 96 billion gallons pre-COVID on an annual basis. So there is a lot of work to do still in terms of getting technologies, including ours, commercially scaled and deployed across the globe, which we're there. And I think from my perspective and from the industry's perspective, we're somewhat at an inflection point. You have technologies that are ready and that are scaling and that are deploying on a global basis. You have companies like JPMorgan Chase and others who are sending really strong signals that they're interested in flying on sustainable products. You have airlines that are making bold commitments to get to net zero soon and much sooner than previously anticipated. You have governments that are stepping up, including ours here in the US and others in the UK, EU, and other places. So we have a lot of the right factors, if you will, that are coming together to truly scale up this industry. As I said in my remarks, we're starting. We started from scratch 13 plus years ago. We're at a point now where we are scaling, and it's a very bright future as far as I'm concerned in terms of getting to significant quantities to enable aviation to fly more sustainably.
Thank you. Kelley, when you look at it from your perspective, what do you see the biggest obstacles that you need to tackle? Like, what are you mentioned bringing governments aboard. What needs to happen to make this really go strong?
Thanks. I'll just go back and name our founding partners really quick in case any of them were left out. So I think you got most of them, but we have Boeing, BCG, Deloitte, JPMorgan Chase, Microsoft, Netflix, Salesforce, and Bank of America so far, and a couple other joining. I think right now, as with any new technology, this is what we've seen with renewables over the years. One of the biggest challenges is the price differential between sustainable aviation fuel and traditional polluting fossil fuels. So we really need to see the production of SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, at scale to close that gap. And there are many, many tools that we can use, that we have used, over history to close that gap. Another big challenge is the feedstock. So right now, most SAF is advanced biofuel, and we need to start using different technologies to produce sustainable aviation fuel. Unfortunately, those technologies are even further out in terms of the price gap. So we need to just keep cutting away at this problem to make sure that we can drive investment and uptake of SAF at scale.
So is that by lobbying airlines? Is that by just improving the technology? Is the number one way forward to improve the technology and lower the costs? Or what are the best way to lower the costs?
I mean, we need to work on both the supply and the demand side, right? To get the production up. We need government tools like subsidies and regulatory measures. We need to make sure that the SAF produced is of the highest quality. So we need criteria and regulatory measures to make sure that the story of SAF is not a story of unintended consequences, as it has been with some alternative fuels in the past. Like I said, we need all the tools in the box, and there are a great and broad range of them that we can use. And SABA is one way to get company demand, so that companies can directly demand this and use this as a way to reach their own sustainability goals, to reach their own net zero goals.
So, Brian, what does it really mean when you say you're a partner and JPMorgan has a partner of this? What does this mean? Does this mean you give money in? Does it mean you won't fly with airlines that don't make certain commitments? How do you as a corporation leverage your position, and what exactly does it mean? Does it mean you'll fly less and start, for instance, using teleconferencing more?
Yeah, look, I think you mentioned it at the beginning. Through the pandemic, we learned that we can continue to drive growth, gain market share, meet with clients, do business virtually. However, it's not something we truly believe is sort of a forever thing. We're going to get back on planes and travel. And there's a reason for that. Our business is based on relationships, and we know that the best relationships are built in person. And so while we know we're going to fly, that's the entire intent of our commitment to SABA, is to say we want to fly the best way possible. We want to have a reduced or net zero carbon footprint from our business travel. Getting on airplanes is a part of doing business, and I'm not sure that that's going away anytime soon. And so while people are going to vacation, people are also going to travel for business, and our goal is that we do that, like I said, the best way possible. So our commitment to SABA is to be committed to SABA. We're engaged. I've learned a lot. We get involved in technical conversations. We learn a little bit about the chemistry. We're trying to make decisions about how to drive policy. And so sort of ultimately shape the end product. And it's one of the exciting things about being a founding member, is getting to sort of be a part of all of that and sort of create the vision for what SABA and the certificate system can look like at the end.
I see, but we're not at the point, right, where there's a policy yet. We're just at the point where we're beginning to think about how it's shaped. So it doesn't yet affect how you fly. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we still, we book a flight, we get on the plane, we do our business, we come home. What we're doing is, so the way that I sort of think about this is, you have to understand the way that we measure our carbon footprint, right? So JPMorgan has a major scope 3 carbon footprint, indirect carbon footprint that is based on business travel, where the direct footprint is from the airlines. And so the airlines are not necessarily incented, other than by wanting to be green, to go out and buy SAF. It's double the price in most markets of jet fuel. And by the way, that's only going to get passed on to the consumer. So what this does is it gives us the ability. So while they have a ton of carbon related to travel and we have a ton of carbon related to their travel, we can now bear the burden of the emissions and also the burden of cost of the more expensive fuel. And so by bringing the JPMorgans and the Netflixes and the others of the world into this conversation, we now can help drive that demand signal and say, no, we all want to do better in this space. We're all trying to up the game here, so let us get involved.
And by involved, this is my last question, I'm just trying to understand what that would mean. Would you someday be willing to pay a little bit more to fly with like a lower carbon fuel?
Yeah, no, I think we definitely would, right? And actually, I'll give a really good example that we don't talk too much about, but we do have our own flight operations, and we did bring SAF to that flight. It was the first delivery of SAF fuel to a major New York metro airport. It was one truckload. It was an experiment, effectively. We put it on a biodiesel tractor trailer. It came from Houston, Texas, but we wanted to prove that we could do it, and we were willing to pay a premium for that. And so it's a small example, but it's a real example of what we're willing to do, and that is the game here. We'd like to develop, through SABA, the SAF industry to a point where no one has to pay a premium for the fuel in order to travel in a more sustainable way, but it's certainly a part of the equation.
So I'm getting a question from the audience, and I'm fine with anyone taking it because I think it speaks to some of the larger issues, which is why we're focused on renewable fuels as opposed to some of the other options. And here's the question for the audience. What is the cause of the focus on combustion compared to some of the wider developments in energy storage and real world, I cannot quite read this word, Real world, I'm not sure. I can't see what that is. Long term flight abilities, renewable, rechargeable, swappable electronic drones. I would add, for my own sake, hydrogen and some of the other options that are out there. Who feels like they want to take that question? Does that seem like you,
I'm happy to
Jimmy?
hop in. Sure. So, listen, I think to fly long haul flights, right, internationally, the only solution right now that is available is to fly on high energy fuels, right? Sustainable aviation fuel does that. Electric aircraft are developing. You see that in smaller aircraft, shorter distance sort of routes. You even have one of the major airlines in the U.S. today made an announcement on a new deal for them on buying electric aircraft for their regional flying. All that is great, and all of that is needed. Hydrogen as well is a long-term solution. I think Airbus and Boeing have both come forward and said, you're looking at 2035, 2040 to 2050 before hydrogen planes become real and sort of pragmatic. The only solution available today and for the next 15 to 20 years is SAF. And you need that energy density to fly the longer distances. Storage isn't quite where it needs to be. It's awfully heavy to put on a plane as well. So there are constraints in terms of electric aircraft, and certainly on hydrogen. Think about the changes to aircraft that will be required to operate those systems. Think about the infrastructure at airports and the transport of hydrogen to airports. Those are significant investments that will impact infrastructure and aircraft over the long term. Airlines that buy aircraft and hold on to them for 15, 20 years, in some cases 30 plus years, right? There's a long life to these aircraft. So using sustainable aviation fuel is really the only solution. And just to piggyback on what Adam was saying earlier, it's not just that consumers are asking for it, right? Airlines do want to fly more sustainably. There's a strong push in different parts of the world. Airlines have a strong interest in getting to net zero. And you have policy, right, that is coming into play. Governments across the globe are putting in place mandates that are going to force airlines and to force the energy companies to produce SAF and to produce sustainable fuels in general. And above and beyond that, aviation, international aviation, is regulated globally by the United Nations and the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. ICAO has a program called CORSIA, which is the Carbon Offsetting Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, that has been in place. And that mandates that aviation is required to reduce its carbon footprint. So airlines are getting the pressure, if you will, from the global governance community, if you will, through UN, from countries and regions of the world, whether it's an individual country or a region like the European Union, consumers, and so on. So there's a lot of factors that are influencing airlines to need to reduce their carbon footprint. And SAF is the best solution for a significant reduction. Airlines are also buying new aircraft, which helps to reduce their carbon footprint. They're flying the aircraft differently in flight, which helps create fuel efficiencies. But again, SAF is really the only near-term and mid-term solution that is practical.
Yeah, I'll add one thing to that if I can.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, Kelley.
We all talked about Brian,
so I
Kelley.
want to add one thing to it, which is that it takes a long time to develop the actual aircraft. So if you think about the time it takes to bring a new aircraft to market on existing technology, imagine the approvals and the time. By the way, we've all seen the Boeing 737 MAX saga play out over the past 3 to 5 years. Right. It takes a long time. And so even if those technologies were available and scalable and the infrastructure was in place, to actually produce an airplane that airlines could buy today to work on those technologies, it will take 15, 20 plus years to get those to market. So I think, again, to the point already made, this is the solution available now for this problem.
Yeah, and all I wanted to add was, these aren't mutually exclusive. Like I said, we need to be working on all avenues. This is the most, I think both Brian and Jimmy said it, this is the most promising now. And there's been a lot of modeling about the decarbonization pathway of aviation. So that, the investment in SAF is not based on nothing. This is the most promising avenue to get aviation on a pathway consistent with 1.5 degrees, on a pathway consistent with net zero emissions by around mid-century. And that's why the focus on this now. But it's not excluding all pathways. And these targets that we're seeing the UN set, the domestic targets that we're seeing countries set, that's bringing us all along on the ride. And what SABA does is add the powerful business customer voice to that drumbeat.
So I'm also getting a question right now for Brian. It says, does JPMorgan have a 2030 net zero target? And how much reduction in travel emissions is part of that target?
Yeah, so we don't have a travel reduction target as part of our commitment. We have a 2030 commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas inventory by 40%, scope 1 and 2. So it's mostly around our real estate footprint. I do think that we're going to see a long-term reduction in the amount of business travel that we do because of what we learned through the pandemic, but we want to learn more about that. We want to see ourselves come out of the pandemic and be successful in the way that we travel. And our focus on business travel is more on these new technologies and SAF and making sure that when we do travel, we're doing it in the most environmentally friendly way possible. So at this point, no reduction target related to travel, but definitely focus on reducing our overall greenhouse gas footprint.
Jimmy, I was hoping you could tell us exactly what is in this sustainable fuel, like what makes it sustainable? And you mentioned a risk that a risk that it could backfire. In other words, that you could get the wrong kind of grow the wrong kind of things, and it wouldn't work. So can you just say exactly what is in this?
Yeah, so sustainable aviation fuel can be produced from any number of sources. The prevailing focus is on waste-based feedstocks. Our technology in particular uses ethanol as the starting point, and we chemically convert that ethanol into sustainable aviation fuel. That ethanol can come from any number of sources, and we have a focus on waste-based sources. What that means for us is we were spun out of a company called LanzaJet, and LanzaJet has built a strong reputation over the last 16 years on its carbon recycling technology. So LanzaJet takes carbon waste streams, converts them to ethanol, and then we take that ethanol and can make it into sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel. Those carbon waste streams can be a wide range. They've proven at commercial scale, and they have 2 plants operational in China that take waste gases from steel mills and take those waste gases, capture them, and convert them into clean ethanol, and then we can use that as the feedstock for sustainable aviation fuel. They can also use municipal solid waste. They can also use direct air capture in terms of capturing CO2 from the environment, adding some green hydrogen to it, and then taking that through the same process, producing ethanol, and then from ethanol to sustainable aviation fuel. So that is the core of our technology. And if you think about ethanol as a feedstock, you also have ethanol widely available across the globe. We can use LanzaTech's waste-based ethanol. We can use ethanol from Brazil that is waste from sugarcane crops. That is the source. At the end of the day, no matter what type of ethanol we end up using, the quality of the fuel that we produce is exactly the same as fossil-based jet fuel. It has all the right properties from a environmental perspective. So 70 to 80+% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, no sulfur, no particulates, and also has a significant reduction in contrails. So those are great characteristics, and we also produce a fuel that is a bit higher energy density than fossil-based jet fuel. So you have all the right things that you need, and all pathways today for producing SAF have to be blended up to a 50% maximum with fossil-based jet fuel. We're not quite yet at being able to use the fuel at 100%. That is coming. There are tests being done with the engine manufacturers and the aircraft manufacturers to get to 100% SAF use. It's just a matter of time as it works its way through the process for getting that approval.
If it was the same price as fossil fuel, would it be more prevalent? How much could it scale up?
As I said earlier, it's been a matter of getting the technology to work well, right? And we are at that point now where we're at that tipping point where technology is going to start to scale pretty dramatically across the globe. Other feedstocks, by the way, that can be used from this process are used cooking oil and other waste products from oilseed crops. So you have, there's three major pathways that can be used today to produce sustainable aviation fuel. More have been approved. They haven't quite yet been tested and demonstrated at scale, but there are several options. My expectation is that you're going to see a lot more production in the coming years. The way we've even set up our company, LanzaJet, with a great group of investors, by the way, right? We have British Airways as an investor. You have Shell, Suncor out of Canada, Mitsui out of Japan. We've had financial support from Al Nippon Airways in Japan. We've got a great group of investors, including LanzaTech, to help us accelerate the commercialization of our technology. We're developing projects with each one of those investors across the globe. And our first project is here in the United States in Georgia. One more point that I wanted to piggyback on just really quickly is, the importance of corporate aviation. Brian made the reference to the JPMorgan sort of fleet and flight operations. We recently had a meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, where 30 corporations that were headquartered in Georgia got together, and we were there to speak to them about using SAF. So if the executives at the top are focusing on it and using SAF in their corporate fleets, and that is now sort of passing on to their supply chains, those are important factors in consideration here in terms of generating the acceleration that's needed for adoption.
That's great. So guys, we're running out of time. We're almost in our last few minutes. Any last points? And if not, just sort of where do you think we'll be quickly, 1 minute piece, in 5 years from now? Brian, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, last thoughts. I mean, I think for JPMorgan, this is a really interesting sort of tie-in to what we're trying to do broadly. And, things like Jim's talking about LanzaJet sort of building this from the ground up and now getting to scale, right? So we're a bank, and banks are meant to help finance these types of initiatives and get involved and hopefully shift investor sentiment and thought into these types of technologies. And so we're excited for what's to come there, right? We have a $2.5 trillion commitment to finance and drive these types of sustainable developments, $1 trillion specifically for green initiatives. And so this is exactly what we want. The thing that we've actually struggled with more than anything is the technologies being available to invest in. Broadly around greenness. And so this is an exciting topic for us to see something coming to market that's going to be available at scale, that's being used today, that we can sort of is tangible to us. And so, I think that's the most important thing. And then I guess 5 years from now, look, I hope we're well above 50% blend ratios. I hope that we're putting it into our planes on a regular basis because it's available on the East Coast. And I hope that we're buying SAF certificates as developed by SABA for the majority, if not all, of our carbon footprint related to business travel. Like I said at the beginning, this is exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. We're down to almost a minute. So, Jimmy, you want to say something quickly?
Yeah, I'm excited, as I mentioned. Yeah, sure. I think we're going to get to significant quantities by the middle of this decade. I think for us, we'll have our technology deployed across the globe. We'll have at least 5 or 6 projects in production by 2025. And, I think we're doing all the right things. We have a ways to go to get to the 96 billion gallon mark that's required for commercial aviation, but we're doing all the right things.
And Kelley, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, we need to be deploying all of our efforts, right, to get this done. I really hope that by 2025, we've seen a massive change in the amount of uptake of SAF. And I would say SAF that meets really robust environmental criteria. What we're working on in SABA is building that criteria based on what was already developed at the International Civil Aviation Organization, and really driving investment in the right kind of SAF, which I think ICAO has already really put forward that demand signal. We're working on that here with our customer partners, and I think with these kind of initiatives and many of them, we're going to get there.